To Japan now, where a new attempt is being made to give CPR to the ailing economy. Last week, we told you how Germany's GDP is poised to overtake Japan's. Well, it seems that Japan is not giving up without a fight. Today, their Prime Minister made an announcement. His name is Fumio Kishida. He announced an economic stimulus package, a package worth $113 billion. Yes, billion. The amount in Japanese yen sounds even more dramatic. It's worth 17 trillion yen. Where is all this money going? To fight inflation. The cost of living crisis is hurting Japanese citizens. Essentials like food are too expensive, so Kishida plans to cut taxes and give cash handouts to the poor. Critics say these are all temporary measures and that Kishida is only doing this to boost his flagging popularity. Because Japan is going to polls next year and Kishida desperately needs an image boost. So will the stimulus package help? Here's our report.
The total scale of the economic package is expected to be around 17 trillion yen.
That was Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida from earlier today. He unveiled his grand economic stimulus package worth a whopping $113 billion. The aim is to crack down on inflation. Japanese inflation has been high for months, by Japanese standards anyway. It stood at about 3% in September. Their central bank's target is 2%. So this is high, and it has been high since early last year. Now 2 and 3% may not sound like much to many from around the world, but that number doesn't show the full picture. Food inflation was much higher at about 9%, and that's hurting the Japanese people, especially those who aren't well off, which is why Kishida has brought out the stimulus package.
Regardless of whether the person has dependents or not, we would like to cut income and resident taxes by a fixed amount of 40,000 yen per person. This will cost about 3.5 trillion yen for about 90 million eligible people.
He's cutting taxes by about $266 per person. The cuts alone are worth about $23.28 billion. He's also planning wage hikes next year. All these measures will add up to about $113 billion in government spending. Kishida plans to use this stimulus package to revive the economy and possibly his image. The approval ratings for Kishida's cabinet are at a dismal 33%, the lowest since he took office in 2021. So the stimulus could raise his fortunes, but some Japanese people remain skeptical.
In the end, I think it is an election campaign measure. It is not enough to do such a thing just for this year, but it is also necessary to continue to look at the long term and make policies with a long-term perspective.
She spoke about a long-term solution to Japan's economic woes, which is a tough ask. The country has been in decline for decades. Today, the problem is inflation, but for years before this, it was the opposite. Deflation had been plaguing Japan since the 1990s, since the end of the country's golden period of economic growth. Here's a quick look at Japan's decline. Up till the 80s, Japan grew rapidly. In 1989, more than 30 of the world's top 50 companies were Japanese. It was an era of wealth for Japan, but it wasn't sustainable. The growth was driven by cheap bank loans and a lack of bank oversight, among other things. It's what economists call a bubble, and that bubble burst in the 1990s, leading to almost 3 decades of deflation and economic stagnation. They're sometimes even called Japan's lost decades. Tokyo has been trying to change this for years, but a range of problems keeps the country from succeeding. Chief among them is Japan's aging population. As the country keeps aging, its workforce keeps getting less productive. Older people also tend to save more money than brash 20-somethings. And if people don't spend money, then prices will eventually go down, which is what led to deflation in Japan. There simply wasn't enough money being spent. As economic activity dried up, so did wages. And that again led to tighter purse strings. It's a vicious cycle that Japan was trapped in until 2019. Japan was finally showing signs of economic recovery in 2018. But along came the Wuhan virus, followed by the war in Ukraine. Both have been disastrous for Japan. They turned the situation even worse. Wages and economic activity were still low, but the disasters brought inflation to Japan. So now, Japan has low wages, falling economic output, and rising prices. The perfect storm which is battering the East Asian nation. Kishida's stimulus package today was much needed, but it's a temporary measure. It doesn't address the long-term issues plaguing Japan. Until the Japanese government finds a way towards sustainable growth, the legacy of the lost decades will continue to haunt the aging island.